There's a book by Os Guinness. It's called Fit Bodies, Fat Minds, where he talks about this verse and just deplores the fact that in American Christianity has drifted away from biblical teaching on this, and instead of being the sharpest, the most learned people around in culture, Christians have become the dumbest and the most ignorant people around, can't even explain their own views on things or why they hold them, and it is freaking deplorable. We're miles away from the biblical picture. Well, Paul certainly wasn't that way. You can tell he was tough. He knew what he was talking about. Guinness says the truth is, for those who think today, the present state of American evangelicalism is appalling. As a spiritual and theologically defined community of faith, evangelicalism is weak or next to non-existent. Their voice is just a joke in most circles. He says, as a subculture, it's stronger, but often embarrassing and downright offensive. Well, there's a lot of truth in that, too. But one of the truly, I think, horrific failures of American evangelicalism is this super spiritual opting out of loving God with my mind. And their argument that, well, reason and thinking, none of that stuff matters. It's just the heart. And they dichotomize those. Jesus didn't dichotomize it. He said all those things. Yes, the heart. Yes, the feelings. And yes, the mind too. And God wants us to be learners who are sharp, who have the answers, who understand at a pretty deep level. Yeah, we should be at the forefront of thinkers. And at different times in history this has been true, but not today. Not at all. American Christianity has opted for ignorance. J.P. Moreland wrote another book. He's another professor out in California. His book's called Love God with All Your Mind. And he says today is the most anti-intellectual period in the history of Christianity. And he backs it up by going right through. It's a very interesting proposition. And we don't even realize this today. Because we just hear the hymn singers going on, and you see on TV, and it's just, oh, God. And it just seems like, I always had that sense as a non-Christian. Doesn't this seem kind of mindless? I always viewed Christians as basically a relatively more ignorant type of person, hillbillies. People that really, they didn't understand others' views, they'd be like, well, Jesus, and you'd be like... well, what about this? You'd try to hit them with, what do you think of existentialism? And they'd be like, huh? That's not Jesus. And, God is not pleased. God is not pleased. God wants to transform our mind by filling it with truth. And we're obligated to be learners, readers, studiers. It's not only what we think, though. It's also the way we think. God wants to transform that part, too. Now, see, the way we think, in other words, this isn't information, but this is how I process situations, how I process my life and analyze it, and it has to do with mixing my value system in with my knowledge. Knowledge is good to have, but you also have to have it governed by a value system. And when you mix your value system and your knowledge together, what you get is wisdom. A deep biblical concept. The Bible talks about this all the time. There's a whole book about it in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, and there's one in the New Testament, in the book of James, is really about this too. Wisdom. One of the most desirable and awesome things that a Christian could ever hope to get. Not easily attained. We may have to grow for years before we become truly wise in the biblical sense. Oh boy. It says in the Old Testament that obtaining wisdom is more valuable than gold, more valuable than silver. Getting wisdom is basically where you look out upon the world and you just have a level of understanding that is awesome. You're able to make decisions in a wise way. You've got God's perspective essentially mixed in, and you understand His view on the world. This is the verse I referred to earlier in 1 Corinthians. It says, "Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world?" Oh yeah, there's a wisdom. There's not only one type of wisdom. There's different types of wisdom because there's different value systems. And so in the world, we have a perspective that's considered wise, that certain things are wise and certain things are not. But it collides violently with the wisdom of God. Let's think about this. The wisdom of God and the wisdom of man, irreconcilable, take you in completely different directions. See, a lot of this is determined because of our starting point. Where do we start in our thinking? Our assumptions will determine our outcomes, our conclusions. And God starts from a different place than humans do. You know, He starts from a position where He has all of His needs fully met. The self-existence of God. He needs nothing. He's never had a day of dissatisfaction. He never had a day of yearning, unfilled desire in His life. What would that be like? Whatever God wants, there it is. He can produce it. Boy, that would be weird. We live totally different than that. We start from a base of fear that our needs won't be met. We are driven by thirst and desire. And sometimes we don't even know what it's for, but it's just this sense of desire that drives us in our lives. Lust, thirst. Yeah. Very different starting points. So when God starts from this position where all of His needs are already met and He needs nothing from anybody, what we find out comes of interest to God is His central value, what He can give out to other people whose needs are not met. God becomes a giver because He doesn't need it to take anything in. Boy, that would be something, wouldn't it? That'd be different there. We're nothing like that. We're sitting over there with this grinding inner need, this thirst, desire, worried. I'm going to end up in a position where I'm going to get second best. I'm going to have to settle. I'm not going to get as much as I could. Yeah, our focus is not on what we can give out at all. The wisdom of man is focused on what we can get for me. We're constantly trying to service our needs in different ways, trying to do what's good for me. And so we get a completely different type of wisdom on that basis than what God has. Since His needs are all met, He's not afraid to give out, even to the sacrificial extreme. He would give out to any level. And you see this in the cross. You know, there's just no holding back. I mean, He gives it all. In our case, we guard what we have against intrusion or loss. People are worried that I'm going to be used, I'm going to be taken advantage of. You know, maybe we'll give out a little bit if it makes us feel better, but the fact of the matter is the main focus is on, this is mine. And that's mine too. Right? When you're like God, He's able to drop the whole question of what's owed Him. He doesn't care. That's why He can forgive. He's basically dropped that question. On our part, we're often obsessed with how other people have failed us and messed us over. We sit around and ruminate about that. We're bitter, angry that we got the shaft. We didn't get as much as we should have.